My mother had been paralyzed for 5 years, or at least that was the absolute truth I believed, until a single phone call shattered my world this morning. My name is Carmen, and at 26 years old, I thought I knew everything about sacrifice after spending my entire young adulthood working 2 jobs in Indianapolis just to keep my family afloat. The quiet routine of my kitchen was interrupted by a professional voice identifying herself as Mrs. Higgins from Chicago General Hospital, claiming she was calling regarding a routine insurance update for my mother, Gloria. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine because my mother was supposed to be in a specialized recovery wing, yet this woman spoke as if she had just seen her in the lobby. When I frantically asked about the progress of her spinal therapy and the $600 I sent monthly for her private care, the line went silent for a painful moment. Mrs. Higgins sounded genuinely confused as she explained that there were no records of long-term paralysis or intensive care treatments for anyone under my mother's name in their entire system. My hands began to shake uncontrollably while I tried to process the impossible words that followed, realizing the hospital had never received a single cent of the $36,000 I had painstakingly provided. The truth hit me like a physical blow when she finally said, "Ma'am, your mother has never undergone long-term treatment at our facility. She actually just walked out of here on her own 10 minutes ago." Before I reveal the dark web of lies my own family spun to steal 5 years of my life, please take a moment to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a single update of this incredible journey toward justice. Your support helps me share the truth and ensures that stories like mine are heard by those who need to hear them most. When I was 21 years old, my life took a dark turn following a frantic late-night phone call from my father, Wayne, that would eventually redefine everything I thought I knew about my family. I remember standing in my cramped apartment in Indianapolis while listening to his choked sobs as he explained how my mother, Gloria, had suffered a catastrophic fall down the basement stairs. The medical details he provided were terrifyingly specific, describing a permanent spinal cord injury that had supposedly left her paralyzed from the waist down and dependent on professional care for the rest of her life. My father insisted that as the eldest daughter with a steady career starting, I was the only one capable of providing the $600 required every month for her specialized private treatments. At that vulnerable age, my sense of duty and overwhelming love for my parents blinded me to the logistical inconsistencies that started appearing almost immediately after the first payment was sent. My younger sister Destiny suddenly became the primary caregiver at their home in Chicago, claiming she had sacrificed her own college plans to stay by our mother's side, day and night. Looking back now, I realize how strange it was that I started noticing several odd patterns that I had previously dismissed as mere symptoms of a family dealing with a major medical crisis. Every time I suggested driving up to Chicago for a weekend visit, Wayne would provide a lengthy list of reasons why my presence would be too emotionally taxing for my mother's fragile state. He constantly reminded me that Gloria was struggling with severe depression due to her physical limitations, and that seeing me would only remind her of the active life she had lost forever. Destiny would often join these conversations to reinforce his claims, describing how even the slightest change in the household routine could trigger a setback in our mother's supposed recovery process. Despite my growing career and the busy life I was building in Indianapolis, the guilt of being the healthy daughter often kept me from asking the difficult questions that were staring me in the face. I had never actually seen a single official medical report or a bill from the rehabilitation center where my mother was allegedly receiving her monthly physical therapy sessions. Whenever I asked for specific details about her neurological progress, my father would quickly pivot the conversation back to the rising costs of medical supplies and the necessity of my next wire transfer. I eventually realized that in over 5 years of sending my hard-earned money, I had never once engaged in a video call where my mother was actually visible in a hospital setting. Our communication was strictly limited to brief whispered phone calls that always seemed to be monitored by either Wayne or Destiny, standing just out of earshot. The suspicion truly began to take root in my mind when I realized that I had never spoken to my mother for more than 2 minutes at a time during our scheduled weekly updates. Whenever I tried to ask her how she was feeling or what the doctors were saying, she would give vague, short answers before one of my family familial would abruptly end the call. My father would always step in with a practiced excuse claiming that her medications made her excessively tired or that her blood pressure was becoming dangerously unstable from the excitement of talking to me. One afternoon, when I finally reached a breaking point and insisted on booking a flight to see her regardless of their warnings, Wayne's voice turned uncharacteristically sharp and defensive. He told me quite coldly, "You cannot come to Chicago right now. Carmen, the doctor, says your appearance will cause your mother's blood pressure to skyrocket and jeopardize her entire treatment plan." This direct rejection felt like a physical wall being built between me and the truth, especially since Destiny had recently started posting photos of expensive designer accessories on her private social media accounts. I found it increasingly difficult to reconcile the image of a family struggling with crippling medical debt, while my younger sister was clearly enjoying a lifestyle that far exceeded her lack of employment. My mind began to replay every conversation we had ever had about the $600, noticing how the urgency for money always seemed to peak right before Destiny went on a weekend trip. I started wondering why a woman who was allegedly paralyzed would need a constant supply of new high-end clothing that my sister claimed was necessary for her comfort. These small, nagging doubts began to coalesce into a heavy weight in my chest that no amount of familial loyalty could completely ignore anymore. I spent many sleepless nights staring at my bank statements, calculating the thousands of dollars that had vanished into a void without a single receipt ever being provided for my records. The more I thought about the hospital's strict visitation policies that Wayne described, the more they sounded like a convenient script designed to keep me at a safe distance from Chicago. I decided to stop taking their word as gospel and started keeping a secret log of every contradiction I heard during our increasingly tense Sunday morning phone calls. My sister Destiny once mentioned a specific doctor's name that I couldn't find in any medical directory in the greater Chicago area, yet I remained silent to avoid tipping them off. I knew that if I wanted to find out what was really happening to my mother and where my money was actually going, I would have to stop being the obedient daughter and start being a witness to my own life. At 3 o'clock that afternoon, my boyfriend Garrett helped me take the first crucial step toward uncovering the reality behind my family's claims. Instead of immediately confronting my father or obsessively counting the physical receipts I had saved, Garrett suggested a much more clinical approach to the situation. He pointed out that since my mother was officially listed as a dependent on my primary health insurance plan, every major medical procedure should have left a digital footprint. We sat together at my dining table while I logged into the member portal with trembling fingers, expecting to see a long list of claims for spinal surgeries and physical therapy. However, the screen displayed a haunting emptiness where there should have been thousands of dollars in documented medical expenses for Gloria's recovery. There were no records of orthopedic consultations, no billing for specialized hospital beds, and certainly no insurance claims for a traumatic spinal cord injury. The realization that my insurance company had never processed a single claim related to her supposed paralysis felt like a second wave of betrayal crashing over me. Garrett remained remarkably calm as he navigated through the last 5 years of my history, noting that the only medical activity recorded for my mother involved minor routine checkups. He then encouraged me to open my banking app so we could perform a thorough audit of exactly where my $600 had been going every month. As we cross-referenced the transaction IDs, we discovered that the funds were never actually deposited into a medical escrow account, as my father Wayne had originally instructed. Every single transfer had been funneled directly into a private personal account belonging to my sister Destiny, under a label marked for family care expenses. We sat in stunned silence for several minutes while the calculator on the table showed a total of $36,000 that had effectively vanished into her pocket. Garrett then decided to use his technical skills to look beyond the financial records by accessing a secondary social media profile that Destiny had kept hidden from my main feed. He managed to locate an unlisted Instagram account where she had been documenting a lifestyle that stood in stark contrast to the grim reality my father described. The gallery was filled with high-resolution photos of my sister posing in front of luxury boutiques and displaying designer handbags that cost more than my monthly rent. I saw images of her enjoying weekend getaways at expensive spa resorts in Illinois, while I was skipping meals in Indianapolis to afford her medical supplies. There were even pictures of her at lavish dinner parties wearing jewelry that I recognized as pieces my mother once said she had sold to pay for her initial surgery. The sheer audacity of her public displays of wealth made my stomach churn with a mixture of intense anger and profound sadness. Watching the digital evidence of my sister's greed felt like watching a stranger dismantle the foundation of my life, piece by piece. Garrett turned the screen toward me, his expression grim as he highlighted a series of recent transactions that coincided perfectly with my father's most desperate pleas for money. He pointed to a specific post where Destiny was flaunting a new pair of designer shoes on the exact same day Wayne had called me, crying about a fictional pharmacy bill. The pieces of the puzzle were finally fitting together, revealing a systematic plot to exploit my guilt and my paycheck for their personal gain. It became undeniable that my father and sister had formed a calculated partnership to treat my hard-earned savings as their personal slush fund. Garrett leaned back in his chair and said, "Look at this, Carmen. Every single cent of those $600 a month has been used by Destiny to pay for her shopping sprees at the mall." The weight of this discovery made it difficult to breathe, as I realized that the people I trusted most had viewed my sacrifice as nothing more than an opportunity. My mind kept returning to the image of my father's tearful face during our many phone calls, wondering how many of those tears had been practiced in front of a mirror. I felt a deep sense of shame for having been so easily manipulated by the very individuals who were supposed to protect my interests. Garrett remained a steady presence by my side, reminding me that the fault lay entirely with the deceivers rather than the one who had acted out of love. We spent the rest of the evening documenting every single social media post and banking transaction as evidence for the inevitable confrontation that lay ahead. I knew that I could no longer ignore the truth or allow myself to be a silent victim of their elaborate charade. The quiet apartment suddenly felt like a war room where the battle lines had been clearly drawn between my past loyalty and my future survival. I realized that my sister's hidden life was funded by my lost vacations, my worn-out clothes, and my constant state of financial anxiety. Every designer logo I saw on her page felt like a personal insult to the hundreds of hours of overtime I had worked to support her. Garrett closed his laptop with a firm click, signaling that the investigation phase was over and the time for action had finally arrived. I looked at the totals on my banking screen one last time, memorizing the figure of $36,000 as a reminder of exactly what had been stolen from me. The obedience that had defined my relationship with my father for 26 years was officially dead, replaced by a cold and unwavering determination to find justice. At 4 o'clock the next morning, Garrett and I set out from Indianapolis to find the final answers that would confirm the betrayal of my family. I had reached a point where I needed to see the truth with my own eyes before taking any irreversible legal action against those who shared my blood. As the miles of dark highway stretched toward the Illinois border, my mind drifted back to the grueling sacrifices I had made over the last 60 months. I remembered countless nights spent eating plain bread in my quiet apartment while working double shifts just to ensure my $600 was sent on time. My youth had been consumed by a constant state of financial anxiety, yet the people I was trying to save were apparently living a life of luxury at my expense. Garrett kept his eyes fixed on the road, providing a steady presence that helped me navigate the overwhelming mixture of hope and despair. He had managed to use the billing address associated with Destiny's credit card to locate a high-end apartment complex where my family was secretly residing. My father had always told me they were living in a modest, accessible bungalow closer to the specialized medical facilities my mother supposedly required. This new information suggested that they were not only stealing my money, but also hiding their actual lifestyle in one of Chicago's most expensive suburbs. Every highway sign indicating our proximity to the city felt like a heavy weight, pressing down on my chest as I prepared for the possibility of a total family collapse. I realized that my obedience had been the fuel for their deception, and the thought made me grip the passenger door handle until my knuckles turned white. Garrett occasionally checked the GPS, ensuring that we would arrive at the suburban address just as the morning routine of the neighborhood was beginning. The transition from the open fields of Indiana to the dense urban landscape of Chicago mirrored the chaotic shift happening within my own soul during that 3-hour drive. I spent most of the journey in silence, grappling with the painful reality that my father Wayne had likely rehearsed his emotional pleas for money. It was difficult to reconcile the image of the man who taught me to be honest with the person who was now funneling my savings into Destiny's shopping habits. I felt a profound sense of isolation despite Garrett being right next to me, knowing that the foundation of my childhood was being dismantled in real time. We eventually crossed into Illinois, and the brightening sky offered no comfort as the reality of my mission became increasingly undeniable. I knew that by the time the sun was high in the sky, my relationship with my parents would be changed forever. Garrett navigated the car through a series of quiet, tree-lined streets until we reached a neighborhood that looked far more affluent than anything my father could ever afford. We found a concealed spot to park a few houses away from the modern building where my family's unit was located, giving us a clear view of the entrance. I checked the time on my phone, realizing we had arrived early enough to witness anyone leaving the residence for their morning errands. My heart was pounding so loudly in my ears that I found it difficult to focus on anything other than the front door of that building. I felt a sudden urge to turn the car around and drive back to Indianapolis just to preserve the lie for a few more days, but the weight of 5 lost years kept me rooted in my seat. Garrett reached over to squeeze my hand, reminding me that I deserved to know the truth, regardless of how much it might hurt. We sat in the car for several hours, observing the quiet rhythm of the suburb, while the tension inside the vehicle became almost unbearable for both of us. I kept my eyes fixed on the driveway, expecting to see a specialized van equipped with a wheelchair lift at any moment to prove me wrong. My mind was a battlefield of conflicting emotions, hoping that I would see my mother in a wheelchair so that I could at least believe in my father's integrity. However, the evidence Garrett had found on the social media accounts made that outcome feel like a distant and impossible dream. I looked at my reflection in the visor mirror, seeing a woman who had aged significantly due to the stress of a responsibility that might not even exist. I took a deep breath and looked at Garrett, my voice trembling but firm as I shared the resolution that had been forming in my mind throughout the night. I told him quite clearly, if all of this is a lie, I will not let them take another cent from my sweat and tears ever again. The wait continued as the morning moved toward noon, and every person who walked past our car made me feel like an intruder in a world built on my own suffering. I started to wonder if they were already inside laughing about how easy it was to manipulate the daughter who lived 3 hours away. The thought of Destiny wearing my hard-earned wages while my mother sat comfortably in a luxury apartment made my blood boil with a cold, focused anger. I realized that I was no longer the frightened girl who had received that initial phone call 5 years ago, but a woman who was ready to reclaim her autonomy. Every sacrifice I had made, from skipped doctor appointments to worn-out shoes, felt like a debt that my family could never truly repay. I watched the front door of the apartment complex with a predator's focus, waiting for the moment the mask would finally slip and reveal the charade. At 11 o'clock that morning, just as the heavy silence in the car made me feel like I was about to give up on our stakeout, the garage door of the luxury apartment complex suddenly began to slide open. My heart skipped a beat while a late-model SUV backed slowly down the driveway and came to a stop right in front of the building's main entrance. I watched in absolute disbelief as the driver's side door opened and my mother Gloria stepped out onto the pavement with a level of agility that made my head spin. There was no wheelchair in sight, no medical equipment of any kind, and she certainly was not the fragile woman I had been picturing in my mind for 5 long years. She was dressed in a sleek designer yoga outfit that looked incredibly expensive, moving with a confident grace that completely contradicted every desperate update my father had ever given me. Gloria walked toward the row of mailboxes at the edge of the property, her steps firm and perfectly balanced as she reached inside to retrieve a handful of letters. My breath hitched in my throat when I saw Wayne and Destiny step out of the house just a few moments later to join her on the sidewalk. All 3 of them were laughing and talking animatedly with one another, as if they were preparing for a casual weekend shopping excursion. My father looked remarkably relaxed, showing none of the stress or exhaustion that always permeated his voice during our tense monthly phone calls. Destiny was trailing behind them while holding a luxury handbag over her shoulder that I recognized as a high-end brand costing roughly 3 months of my salary. I sat frozen in the passenger seat of Garrett's car, watching my family share a joyful moment that was funded entirely by the years of my life I had willingly sacrificed. The betrayal felt like a physical weight crushing my lungs, making it almost impossible for me to comprehend the sheer scale of the deception they had maintained. The realization that they were all co-conspirators in a plot to drain my savings made my blood run cold with a focused, icy rage. I saw my mother stretch her arms toward the sky and take a deep breath of the morning air, looking healthier than I had seen her in over a decade. It was undeniable that her supposed paralysis was nothing more than a profitable fiction designed to keep my $600 flowing into their bank accounts. Destiny leaned over to show something on her phone to my father, and the 2 of them shared a private joke, while Gloria smiled warmly at both of them. I felt a sudden violent urge to throw open the car door and scream at them until my voice gave out, but Garrett's firm grip on my arm kept me anchored to my seat. He reminded me in a low, urgent whisper that we needed to stay focused so he could continue capturing every second of their movement on his camera. Garrett's steady breathing next to me provided a necessary contrast to the chaotic storm of emotions that was currently threatening to overwhelm my sanity. He methodically took photos of Gloria walking unassisted and recorded video of the 3 of them loading several shopping bags into the back of their expensive vehicle. Every frame he captured was another piece of evidence that would eventually dismantle the elaborate charade they had built around my mother's health. I watched as Wayne placed a protective hand on my mother's back, a gesture that once would have moved me to tears, but now only filled me with profound disgust. I realized that my father had used his role as a protector to mask his true identity as a calculated manipulator of his own daughter's heart. My sister continued to chatter away, her face lit up with an excitement that was undoubtedly fueled by the prospect of spending more of my hard-earned money. The sheer cruelty of their shared laughter made me feel like an outsider in a family I had literally spent my entire adulthood trying to preserve. I saw my mother climb back into the driver's seat with ease, proving that she was not only capable of walking, but also perfectly fit to operate a vehicle on her own. My mind replayed the countless hours I had spent crying in my Indianapolis apartment, praying for a miracle that had apparently happened 5 years ago without my knowledge. I looked at Garrett, my eyes burning with a mixture of tears and unwavering determination as the full weight of their crimes finally settled in my soul. My voice was a ghost of its former self, barely audible above the quiet hum of our car's engine as I pointed toward the woman who gave me life. I told Garrett quite clearly, "My mother is standing right there. She is walking perfectly normal, yet for 5 years they told me she was a cripple." We remained in our concealed spot as their SUV pulled away from the curb and disappeared down the quiet, tree-lined street toward the nearby shopping district. The silence that returned to our car was heavy with the knowledge that the world I had known just 6 hours ago was officially gone forever. I felt a strange sense of clarity emerging from the wreckage of my trust, knowing that the time for being a victim had officially come to an end. Every dollar I had sent and every meal I had skipped now felt like a permanent mark of their betrayal that I would carry with me for the rest of my life. I looked at the digital camera in Garrett's lap, seeing the blurred image of my mother on the screen as a final confirmation of the truth. I knew that the next time I saw my father and sister, it would not be as a daughter, but as a woman who was ready to demand every single cent of her life back. On Monday morning, I brought the entire collection of video evidence to the law office of Mr. Arthur Vance, a specialist in financial fraud. My hands remained steady while I handed over the digital files that Garrett had painstakingly recorded during our time in Chicago. Mr. Vance carefully reviewed the footage of Gloria walking unassisted, comparing it with the desperate text messages my father had sent regarding her fictional paralysis. The lawyer explained that the actions of Wayne and Destiny constituted federal wire fraud due to the electronic transfer of funds across state lines under false pretenses. He noted that the systematic nature of their deception spanning 5 years and $36,000 made this a particularly severe criminal matter. The professional atmosphere of the office provided a cold contrast to the emotional turmoil I had been experiencing since the first hospital call. I sat quietly while Arthur drafted a formal request to Chicago General Hospital to obtain an official certified statement of Gloria's health records. Arthur explained that transferring money through the internet or over the phone as part of a fraudulent scheme is a serious felony under United States law. He emphasized that the legal consequences for my family would be devastating if the authorities decided to pursue the case to its fullest extent. My mother had unknowingly provided the final piece of the puzzle by seeking a routine checkup which created a paper trail that directly contradicted the paralysis narrative. We spent several hours compiling a comprehensive legal file that included every Western Union receipt, the insurance audit, and the surveillance videos from the weekend. The evidence was overwhelming, leaving no room for my father to claim that this had been a simple misunderstanding or a series of mistakes. I felt a strange sense of detachment as I looked at the documentation of my own exploitation being organized into neat piles on the mahogany desk. It was becoming clear that the people who raised me had effectively treated my career as their personal bank account. I found myself struggling with a deep internal conflict regarding whether to report them to the police immediately or offer one final chance at restitution. One part of my soul wanted to see Wayne and Destiny face the full weight of the law for the 5 years of my youth they had stolen. Another part of me felt a lingering, painful attachment to the family I thought I had, making the prospect of sending them to prison feel like a heavy burden. Arthur Vance watched me closely, his expression showing a level of sympathy that only someone who dealt with family betrayal every day could provide. He reminded me that the choice was entirely mine, but he also cautioned that people capable of such long-term manipulation rarely change without a significant shock. I realized that my decision would not only affect my financial future, but also define the type of person I would become after this ordeal. The quiet hum of the office air conditioner was the only sound in the room while I contemplated the fate of my parents and sister. The legal strategy we developed involved a formal demand for the full return of the $36,000 in exchange for not filing a criminal complaint. Arthur drafted a letter that detailed the specific evidence we possessed, including the exact dates and times when my mother was seen walking and driving. He explained that by presenting them with the reality of their situation, we were putting the responsibility for their future back onto their own shoulders. I felt a cold chill as I realized that the man I called Dad would soon have to choose between his greed and his freedom. My sister Destiny would also have to face the fact that her luxury lifestyle was about to be dismantled by the sister she had mocked behind her back. We finalized the documents just as the afternoon sun began to dip below the horizon, marking the end of my life as a silent victim. My voice was calm when I finally asked Arthur about the potential prison time they were facing under the current evidence. I told him the lawyer said that my father and sister could face serious prison time if I decide to pursue this fraud case in court. We agreed to wait for the certified medical records before making the final delivery of the demand letter to ensure our position was legally unassailable. I spent the rest of the evening at a small coffee shop near the office, trying to process the fact that my life was now being managed by a legal professional. The images of my mother walking toward the mailbox in Chicago kept replaying in my mind, serving as a reminder of why I could not back down. Every sacrifice I had made over the last 5 years suddenly felt like a transaction that had been defaulted upon by the other party. I realized that the guilt my father had used to control me was a hollow tool that no longer had any power over my decisions. Garrett arrived to pick me up, his presence a reminder that I was no longer alone in this battle against my own blood. We drove home in a silence that felt heavy with the weight of the coming storm, knowing that the peace I sought would only come after the truth was fully settled. As we prepared for the final confrontation, I began to see my family not as a unit of love, but as a group of individuals who had failed their most basic moral obligations. I had spent years worrying about my mother's health, while she was likely enjoying the very vacations I had denied myself. The betrayal was not just about the $36,000, but about the thousands of hours of my life that I would never be able to get back. I looked at the copy of the demand letter in my lap, seeing the cold legal language as a necessary shield against any further emotional manipulation. Arthur Vance had given me the tools to fight back, but the courage to use them had to come from within my own shattered heart. I knew that by the end of the week I would finally know if my family valued their relationship with me more than the money they had stolen. The journey toward justice was now officially underway, and there was no turning back from the path I had chosen. On Friday evening, Wayne and Destiny appeared at my front door in Indianapolis because I had been 3 days late with my monthly payment. I could see the practiced look of concern on my father's face as he stepped into my living room without waiting for an invitation. He immediately launched into a frantic explanation about a sudden complication with my mother's condition that required an urgent and expensive surgery. Destiny nodded along with every word, adding her own fabricated details about how Gloria was struggling to breathe and crying out for help. They seemed more aggressive than usual, clearly sensing that their primary source of luxury was starting to slip away from their grasp. I sat quietly on the sofa, allowing them to finish their elaborate performance, while a hidden recorder captured every single lie coming out of their mouths. It was sickening to watch my own family use the image of a dying woman to manipulate me into handing over more of my life. I decided to play along for a few moments to see exactly how far their greed would push them during this final encounter. I put on a mask of total desperation, telling Wayne that I was currently in the process of applying for a high-interest personal loan just to cover the new costs. The mention of more money made my father's eyes light up with a predatory glint that he could not quite hide behind his fake tears. He encouraged me to sign whatever paperwork was necessary, claiming that Gloria's life was worth any amount of debt I might incur. Destiny even suggested that I should consider selling my car or moving into a cheaper apartment to ensure the medical fund remained full for the rest of the year. Hearing them encourage me to ruin my own financial future for a lie was the final confirmation I needed to end this charade forever. I felt a cold, unwavering clarity settle over me as I reached for the thick envelope resting on the coffee table. The silence that followed was heavy with anticipation as I slowly pulled out the high-resolution photographs Garrett and I had taken in Chicago. I spread the images across the table showing Gloria walking briskly toward the mailbox and loading shopping bags into a brand new SUV. My father's face went from feigned sorrow to a pale, ghostly mask of shock in a matter of seconds, while Destiny stared at the photos in stunned silence. I followed this up by sliding the certified letter from Chicago General Hospital across the surface, which officially confirmed that my mother had no history of spinal injury. The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly from a practiced drama to a scene of absolute panic as they realized their 5-year game was finally over. I felt no pity for the man standing before me, only a profound sense of disgust for the way he had exploited my love for his own benefit. The evidence was undeniable, leaving them with no room to retreat into their usual scripts of guilt and obligation. Wayne began to stammer, his voice trembling as he tried to construct a new lie to explain away the visual proof of my mother's health. He claimed that the photos must have captured a rare moment of spontaneous recovery, or that I was somehow misinterpreting the medical documents. Destiny attempted to snatch the papers away, but I was faster, pulling them back and reminding her that Garrett was waiting in the other room with digital backups. The cowardly nature of their defense only made me more determined to hold them accountable for every single cent they had stolen from me. My father eventually stopped talking, his shoulders slumping as he realized that the daughter he had manipulated for so long was officially gone. He looked at me with a mixture of fear and desperation, likely calculating the legal consequences that Arthur Vance had described earlier that week. The air in my apartment felt cleaner now that the truth had finally been spoken aloud for the first time in 5 years. I stood up and looked my father directly in the eyes, refusing to let him look away from the wreckage of the trust he had destroyed. I thought about the 60 months of my life I had wasted worrying about a woman who was apparently enjoying tennis matches and shopping trips. Every sacrifice I had made felt like a heavy stone being lifted off my heart as I confronted the two people who had betrayed me most. My voice was steady and cold, devoid of the emotion that usually allowed them to maintain control over my decisions. I demanded to know if they truly believed I would continue to fund their luxury lifestyle after seeing my mother Di Chuyen with such ease. I looked at the man who had raised me and asked a question that would echo in the silence of our relationship forever. I told him, "Do you still want to tell me that Mom is paralyzed, especially since I have video of her shopping happily in Chicago on Saturday morning?" The confrontation ended with me handing them the formal demand letter from my lawyer, giving them exactly 10 days to return every cent of the $36,000. Wayne tried to reach out to touch my arm, but I stepped back, making it clear that the physical and emotional bond between us was permanently severed. Destiny began to cry, but these were the tears of a caught thief rather than a grieving sister, and they had no effect on my resolve. I opened the front door and gestured for them to leave, watching as they walked toward their car with their heads bowed in shame. The house felt remarkably peaceful once they were gone, as if the lies that had haunted the hallways for 5 years had finally been swept away. I knew that the battle was not entirely over, but for the first time since I was 21, I was no longer living a life built on a foundation of deception. I sat down and exhaled a long, shaky breath, ready to face whatever came next in my pursuit of total justice. 1 month after that horrific evening of confrontation, my family officially disintegrated in the most painful way imaginable, as the reality of their crimes finally caught up with them. Faced with the undeniable evidence and the looming threat of federal prison, Wayne and Destiny, were forced to sell the luxury SUV and mortgage their home in Chicago to repay the $36,000. The legal pressure applied by Arthur Vance ensured that they could not escape their financial obligations without facing immediate criminal prosecution for wire fraud. I watched from a distance as the life of leisure they had built on my suffering was dismantled piece by piece to satisfy the demands of justice. My mother Gloria was forced to move into a much smaller apartment, while Destiny had to withdraw from her expensive university courses to find a job in the service industry. The greed that had once bound them together in a conspiracy against me now became the very thing that drove them into a state of bitter mutual resentment. The process of reclaiming my money was surprisingly clinical, yet every transaction felt like a final nail in the coffin of my childhood memories. I sat in Arthur's office to sign the formal severance documents officially terminating all legal ties and any future inheritance rights with the people who shared my DNA. This act of signing away my family was the hardest thing I had ever done, but I knew that I could never truly heal while still being tethered to their toxicity. When the final payment cleared in my bank account, I experienced a profound sense of emptiness rather than the triumphant joy I had originally expected to feel. I realized that while I had recovered the stolen funds, the 5 years of trust and innocent love I had given could never be returned to me. I walked out of the law firm as a woman who was technically wealthier but emotionally orphaned by the very people who were supposed to be my sanctuary. Despite the lingering sadness, a new sense of autonomy began to take root in my life, as I realized that I no longer had to answer to anyone's fabricated crises. I spent my first weekend of freedom simply sitting in a park without checking my phone for frantic messages or calculating how much overtime I needed to work. Every dollar in my savings account now represented my own future, rather than a tool for my sister's vanity or my father's calculated deceptions. I eventually decided to change my phone number and move to a different part of Indianapolis to ensure that their desperate pleas for forgiveness could never reach me again. The silence that followed was not lonely, but rather a necessary space for me to rebuild a life that was finally based on truth and self-respect. I knew that the road to recovery would be long, but I was finally walking it on my own terms, without the weight of their lies dragging me down. I recently found myself standing in front of the mirror in my new apartment, looking at a version of Carmen that was finally at peace with her past decisions. The tired eyes that had spent years weeping for a paralyzed mother were now replaced by a steady gaze that was focused on the horizon of my own potential. I recognized that the betrayal I suffered was a harsh lesson in the necessity of boundaries and the importance of verifying the truth even within the domestic sphere. The $36,000 was back in my possession, but the clarity I gained was worth far more than any amount of currency. I took a deep breath and promised myself that the next 50 years of my life would belong entirely to me and the people who actually earned my trust. I looked at my reflection one last time and whispered a truth that felt like a permanent seal on my past. I told myself I have recovered my money, but more importantly, I have reclaimed the life that my own parents had stolen from me. This story is a specialized production of our channel, designed specifically for educational purposes to illustrate the critical importance of maintaining personal boundaries. We aim to convey a powerful message regarding the necessity of handling family crises with logical verification and legal protection, rather than relying solely on blind emotional impulse. Carmen demonstrated exceptional courage by decisively protecting her future and choosing to sever all ties with her toxic family members once the betrayal was confirmed. The antagonists ultimately faced the inevitable consequences of their systematic deception, proving that even the most elaborate lies cannot withstand the weight of objective truth and legal accountability. The following insights serve as a stark reminder of the values we must uphold to protect our own well-being in any relationship. True kindness must always be balanced with personal autonomy, as absolute blind trust often provides a convenient mask for those who seek to exploit your labor and emotional vulnerability for their own gain. Establishing firm boundaries is an essential act of self-preservation, ensuring that your financial and emotional resources are never used as a slush fund for individuals who refuse to respect your hard-earned sacrifices. The courage to verify the truth is your most powerful shield against manipulation, because maintaining transparency and demanding accountability are the only ways to ensure that your love is never treated as a commodity. I want to express my deepest gratitude to all of you who have patiently listened to this bitter journey until the very last second. Your support and empathy mean everything to me as I continue to share these difficult truths. If you were in my position, would you choose the path of cold confrontation, or would you have found a way to quietly forgive? Please share your thoughts in the comments below.